Bad agreements are often the source of commercial disputes. So I want to talk about what leads to a bad agreement. Very first thing when you have a dispute and you go to see any legal advisor is they're going to ask you straight away, what agreement did you make? Can you show it to me? Is it in writing? I can't tell you the number of times that I've had business people in dispute tell me that they didn't have a written agreement. And when I asked them, why don't you have a written agreement, they said things like, typically, we trusted each other. We didn't see the need to have a written agreement. Or the agreement is in a variety of emails between us. People, once engaged in a dispute, that don't have a proper written agreement always have a much more problematic dispute to deal with. So, what's a bad agreement? I would answer that firstly by saying a bad agreement is primarily one that has never been put into writing. Now, of course, agreements can be made verbally. Oral agreements are well recognized by the law. So don't let anyone tell you that you can't have an agreement that's just oral. But the point is this: oral agreements might be good enough just to start something. But if you have a serious business proposal, if you have a serious business project or venture, at some early point, once you can see that it's a serious venture, the parties need to turn their minds to having a written agreement. Are all written agreements good agreements? Absolutely not. There are many, many poorly drafted written agreements. And they can be the main reason for a dispute being very, very difficult to deal with. But there's a very good reason, just in human experience, why so many people go into business don't have good agreements, don't have written agreements, or don't have good written agreements. The reasons are that people get excited around an idea and they just want to get going. And they don't want to pay attention to the details. There's a strong tendency at the beginning of a business venture when people are excited around a common idea to just want to get on and do it, and not to slow things down by sitting down and brainstorming about all the things that really you need to brainstorm on to make a good agreement. So what are those types of things? Well, here are some of them. When you're setting off to do business together, to have a business venture, parties need to really knuckle down and work out very specifically what the requirements are of doing business together, what are the resources they're going to need, what are going to be the duties of each of the people in the venture and their responsibilities, what's the cost going to be, how's the cost going to be managed, what about different expenses that are going to come up, how are they going to be paid for and in what ratio, what proportion. What about when the business starts to make money? Are we all going to receive equal shares of the profit? How long is it going to take for the business to make a profit? And how are we going to get by cash flow wise until that happens? There are a multitude of issues that will surface and have to be dealt with if the parties slow down and say, listen, we're at the point now where we know this is a serious business venture. Before we do anything else, we now have to turn our minds to having proper agreements. Now there's sort of an order to this thing of agreements. And the approach I take is that in the beginning, unless there is a great big pool of cash to start off with, but in most cases that won't be so, it's very important to manage limited cash flow. So it's generally not a good idea to have to do things at the beginning that are going to be very demanding on cash flow. But here's the thing that, in my view, everyone who's going into business together should start off with. Before you start talking about expensive creation of companies and trusts and bank accounts and all these things, the very first agreement that people in business need to make is a joint venture agreement. And the joint venture agreement is simply an agreement between parties who want to do business in common together for mutual benefit, for mutual gain, that spells out their relationship. There's no, nothing complex, or there's no, as I say, rocket science to do with this. It's just a matter of people sitting around a table and in their own language putting down, what's this business about? What's our main objectives? What are the values of the business? What's our mission? Where are we heading for? And how are we going to get there? And in getting there, what are each of us going to do? What's going to be the contribution from each of the joint venture partners? And what are their specific duties? They need to be spelt out. There's no room for guessing. There's no room for assumptions. This is where you need to be very specific. And in mapping out the stages, the timeline of the project, the different stages of work, mapping out who's going to do what, mapping out what the costs are likely to be and how those costs are going to be managed, and if money needs to be raised, how's that money going to be raised? All these things go into a joint venture agreement. The joint venture agreement might say, well, once we get to this stage of the project, we know we're getting some traction. So now we know we can take some other important steps, and this is all covered in the joint venture agreement. Some of those steps might be, well, now's the time to decide what kind of entity we're going to be. Are we going to be just a corporate entity? Are we going to be a partnership? Are we going to be a trust? Are we going to have a company and trust? This is where you need to get very, very specific advice at the right time from both, both legal advice and accounting advice, and make sure you get the whole picture. So it's these things that can all be nicely managed and nicely covered in a joint venture agreement. And at that point of time, of course, maybe some money is starting to come in, and that money can be allocated to various things that are expenses of the joint venture. It may be that when you reach that point, some very important next steps have to occur. Because if you're going to form a company, it means, well, who's going to be directors and what's going to be the holdings of the different shareholders and how are they going to hold the power of the company and who's going to have particular roles in the company. These are all things that need to be thought about and identified up front and mapped out in the joint venture agreement. So I hope you can see from what I'm saying here that there is a science to this. There is an order to this. And if you understand this, the chances of a dispute emerging are vastly reduced. The more that you can project into the future and map out how you will arrive at different stages of the project and how it will be properly managed and how costs will be managed and how different responsibilities will be executed and by whom and over what timeline, you are dealing with the detail. Now, a very major cause of dispute is the failure to deal with detail. It's the proceeding ahead on assumptions only, on guesswork, on speculation. Now, this may all feel good and fuzzy in the beginning because you just want to get down and get to work because you're excited around the business idea and you just want to get traction, you want to get moving. I understand that. I understand that totally. I've been in business myself in different ways, and I know what that means. And I know that to suddenly stop that good feeling and to say, no, we have to sit down first and we have to brainstorm and we have to nut out and we have to look at the worst case scenarios. We have to identify them and say, well, if this happens, what do we do? And who's responsible for this? We have to buckle down and say, well, is this an equal partnership? Is this an equal joint venture? If so-and-so is going to bring in a big chunk of capital and the rest of us aren't, but the other person's going to bring in certain expertise or certain skills or whatever else, how are we going to balance that together in terms of, are we all going to be equal, or do we need to set this up so that someone has a right, has a superior right to the others because they brought in more at the beginning? You see, these are difficult issues, and they can cause some feelings of, put people ill at ease, because at the beginning of a project, everyone feels, I'm in this, and I want equality. Well, people can feel that sense of equality in the beginning because they're all gathered and coalesced around a great idea. But if you want to do business properly and you want to minimize the chance of disputes emerging and erupting and spiraling out of control and destroying your whole business and bringing it all crashing down around your ears in a matter of months or in a year down the track, just after the business is starting to take off, you have to deal with these issues. Now, if you don't know how to do that yourself, there are people that can help you. And that's one of the things I do and what we do in Commercial Disputes Management Center. We help people start off in the right way. Because when you're dealing with the whole thing of commercial disputes, you need to keep in mind that there's prevention. There's things that can be done at the very beginning as risk management and prevention that will pay dividends down the track. Now, I know, again, that in the beginning when there's excitement and people don't want to spend too much money, there's a great reluctance to do what I'm saying. The enthusiasm is just, let's get going, right? We can do this later. But I'm here to tell you that that attitude of we'll do this later, we'll put it on the back burner, and we'll come to it eventually, may come back to haunt you. So as I said, there's an order to things, there's a science to this, and you need to observe it. If you don't feel you can do that on your own, then I strongly suggest you get someone to help you in that early stage to set in place all these things that I'm telling you about so that it works like clockwork, and then you can get on with your business and feel not only excited about the business you're doing, but feel confident that you've put in place your risk management and that nothing will suddenly pop out of the woodwork or out of left field and suddenly stop you in your tracks because you've now got a dispute. And the dispute becomes a roadblock, a barrier to you proceeding on with your business vision. Now, there's another side to this. If you've done what I'm telling you, if you followed my advice here and you put in place these precautionary things, the risk management, the prevention for, that will protect you from future disputes, if you've attended to all that, the other side of it is that if you've done your agreements properly, if you've done your agreements properly, your very agreements will spell out exactly what you'll do if a dispute starts to emerge, and that you'll be able to do it as quickly as possible, because the worst thing that can happen with disputes is for them to fester and spiral out of control. So if you have a bad agreement, that bad agreement, one of the reasons why it's bad is because it doesn't say anything about what you do when a dispute starts to emerge. If you have a good agreement, it tells you precisely what you will do if a dispute comes about. And it does everything in a very orderly way. And it does it in a way that helps people stay together, not driving them apart, helps them deal with the dispute in a cooperative, creative way, not a polarized, combative, aggressive way. So therefore, the chances of that dispute being resolved, being managed very efficiently and resolved early is very, very strong. That's a good agreement. So I hope you see the difference here. I hope I've given you some understanding here that bad agreements happen right from the beginning. They happen because people don't address these issues that I've identified to you in this talk. So to finish off, I just ask you, think about where you are right now. Where are you in this timeline? Are you at the very beginning of setting up a business project, a joint venture? Are you already somewhere down the track with it? Have you already encountered some problems? It doesn't matter which scenario you're in, we can help you. Just give us a call, come in and talk to us, and we'll explore the best options for you and work out a blueprint. If you happen to be at the very beginning, that's great, because we can help you put in place all these different things that will give you the assurance that your business will stay on track and you won't fall into dispute by default because you didn't attend to these things.